And one of the least important things in tournament play is card counting. Not important, man. Not important. So I mean, you could play without ever counting cards. Now once you're doing it, you're doing it. So it's a little extra that you got. But I mean, I was playing once where a guy was way ahead of me and he was counting. He was moving his things with the count every time. And I needed opposition bet this guy because I was way behind. And I was counting and I knew when he was going to bet small and I bet big, and I knew when he was going to bet big and I bet small. I caught him, passed him, beat him. And after the thing, he came up to me and he goes, well, that was really good, but why do you bet so low when the count's high? That's why I beat you, you goof.
We're here at a boot camp, and this is really an honor for me. I got started with card counting with two books, really. Professional Blackjack by Stanford Wong. I told you guys about that. I was loaned this exact copy. It's got these like little X's next to the chapters that Ben was like, read these chapters, you know? That's what got me started. And then this book. And I was substitute teaching, and what I did is I took the cover off of it, you know, so that while all the kids are like having their study hall, I'm reading this book, you know, and this just blew my mind. Like this book, it went from this is a thing in theory to like this is a thing. It went from I could make $20 an hour to I could make hundreds of dollars an hour. And it was the inspiration I need to say, hey, we can take this really seriously. And then 6 months later, we're making hundreds of dollars an hour. Well, the cool thing about this book is that the publisher and editor of this book are willing to publish and edit my book now 15 years later, which is like absolutely incredible. Couldn't have imagined this. So guys, help me welcome Anthony Curtis, publisher of Huntington Press.
Interesting, those two books, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I read more, but started with these two.
Well, you know, we're actually going to take over Wong's book, Professional Blackjack. We're in the process right now of making a deal to take over all the Stanford Wong inventory, because finally he's going to hang it up, I guess, in terms of gambling. But he and Peter Griffin were my mentors. They were the guys I learned off of.
So you get to now publish your mentors.
I do. I published, you know, like when I originally published Theory of Blackjack by Griffin, to me it was kind of like a physics student publishing Einstein. You know what I mean? It was like, this is the guy that I studied. And wow. I met him one day at the Silver Slipper, Castaways. And, Silver Slipper. And I got the gumption up to walk up and invite him for a beer, and I knew he drank Heineken, and he accepted, and we became friends for years until he died, and ended up publishing him. Now my other mentor being Stanford Wong, I'm going to get his books too. So
that's awesome.
It's pretty cool. I started pretty early. I was in high school in Michigan, in Dearborn, Michigan, and I was a game player. I was just, I kind of realize now that I understood a whole lot about probability and game theory before I started reading about probability and game theory. So that was a good thing. If you're playing games like Monopoly and Stratego and so forth, you know, you're figuring out the ways to beat the grown-ups, you know, kind of when you're a kid. So we had a friend of the family who came and played Monopoly with us. We used to play speed Monopoly. We'd play 7 or 8, 9 games in a day, and they'd really go at it. It was really cutthroat stuff. And one day I was in 10th grade, and he came to the house and he said, I think you'll get this. And he handed me a book on blackjack. And I read it, and I went, wow, this is pretty hot. And that was it. From 10th grade on, that's what I was doing. That's what I was studying. I went to Duke for a year. I went to Georgia Tech originally, then Duke for a year, and then UCLA. And the whole time I didn't hardly go to class. I was just studying and getting ready to come to Vegas. You know, when I came out, this was in 1979. As soon as I turned 21, 79, way back. And I just got pummeled, you know. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I could do it in a vacuum. I was really good. I could count down a deck really fast, and I knew all the indices. I knew everything. But I didn't really understand what it was like being on the street and actually doing it. So, you know, I had some problems, and kind of went back home with my tail between my legs back to Michigan for maybe about 4 months. And I really talk about boot camp. I held my own boot camp. I would get up every morning at 4 in the morning, go down into my parents' basement, and just attack everything I could. I would read for a certain amount of time. I would count down decks. I would go through flashcards, and I got myself together. And I came back and I went to the famous conference in Lake Tahoe in 1981, I believe it was, where everybody was there. Stanford Wong, Peter Griffin, Ed Thorpe, they were all, Arnold Snyder, they were all just getting famous, Ken Houston. And I went to that conference for 5 days and never said a word to anybody, sat by myself in a corner and just soaked it all in. And when I got back to Vegas, I started doing better. And then I started, kind of like in Colin's book we're going to talk about, he talks about how you get better and how you soak it in, and then it starts to work for you. And I started to understand what variance was, and I started to understand that maybe my first results weren't indicative of what was going to go forward. And then I began to meet people. And that's what you do, what you did back then. There was no internet. I'm so old, there was no internet. But I mean, it was what I call the information conduit. That was, you would get friendly with somebody, and then you would form these alliances, and you would meet more and other people. So I was playing with some guys just on the side, just fooling around, not really understanding team play, really doing lots of couponing and things like that, until I got a call from Stanford Wong. And just right out of the blue, it's just Stanford Wong. Hello, this is Stanford Wong. He'd talk like that. And I was like, this is great, and what do you want? He's like, well, I got your message, I got your number and all that, and I'm forming a blackjack tournament team. And you come highly recommended, and would you like to play on my team? I was like, yeah. There's no thinking about it. So that was it. I played with Wong on his tournament team. We kind of thought we were blazing a trail, but there are a lot of other really good players out there and a lot of other good teams. So we weren't new, but we kind of brought it a little bit to the forefront there. My best buddy at the time playing on the team was a guy named Blair Rodman. Blair's won a gold bracelet in the World Series of Poker. He wrote our book, Kill Phil, which is a beginner's way to play tournaments and hang with the pros. And Blair and I ran into another group, a guy named Alan Brown. Alan Brown was very famous for almost being killed in the back room of the Horseshoe when he got back roomed, and just they beat the crap out of him and nearly killed him. Him and another guy. And Alan had a really good, strong team that we met through playing tournaments. So we played with Blair and I went and played with Alan Brown for quite a while. And on that team there were some pretty infamous people. One of them being Russ Hamilton. Anybody know the name? If you ever maybe you saw 60 Minutes, the guy who was spying the cards online and was looking at people, that was Russ Hamilton. Kind of a bad guy, but also the most brilliant card player I've probably ever met in my whole life. So we were out there playing about the time that the MIT team was getting famous for the book they did with Ben Resnick and the movie 21. We were playing kind of parallel to them, and we were playing with those guys and against those guys. We'd run into them, and sometimes we'd make deals, and other times we wouldn't. And that team lasted for quite a while, and then we kind of splintered off a little bit, and those were my two main ones right there. My dad was a university professor, so that was kind of a tough sell. And I could sort of explain to my dad, who was into educational, into learning disabilities, hearing disorders and things like that. So he was really into stats and the math of it. And I explained to him how this all worked and that I thought it could work. And he said, then what? And I said, well, I don't know. If I'm good at it, then maybe something else like publishing. So it was always in my mind. And when Peter Griffin fell into my lap, literally fell into my lap as a buddy of mine and said, you want to publish my book? I was like, okay, so we can publish like the greatest blackjack book ever to start? Okay, I'll start with that. So we did, and then I did, I don't know if you guys know, but I've done a newsletter for 30 some years called Las Vegas Advisor. And that was truly the good idea. I tell everybody I had one good idea in my life, and that was it. And we still do it to this day. So I was already planning to go towards publishing, and of course I was going to do what I knew. And I had the field experience, and I had so many connections with people who are still playing. When our team with Alan Brown's group broke up, a lot of people went on to successful things. I did the publishing. Blair went on to win to become a poker player. Russ Hamilton won the World Series poker main event. And became notorious. A couple guys went to real estate, and Alan Brown, the guy who founded it, is probably one of the top 3 for volume sports bettors in the world today.
Wow.
Yeah, all advantage play stuff. There was a lot of money to be made in tournaments. The tournaments were just gigantic. And ironically, we made so much money in tournaments that it hurt our shelf life, especially me. I just happened to win more. Not necessarily that I was better, but it just kind of happened to roll my way. And I got pretty famous for winning blackjack tournaments and other tournaments. And after a while, the casinos would start to say, you again? I won twice in a row. I won the Keno championship at Caesar's Palace. And it's like you can only tell them so long that, the way I win is my numbers are good. I play my mom's birthday, my dog, the day I got my dog, And they believed that for a little while, and then they started going, wait a minute. And I started getting phone calls from the owners going, we think we don't want you to play anymore. So we did a lot of that, and that sort of raised our profile, which wasn't good. We did a lot of counting, but we also did a lot of, advantage play of other sorts. I will say we did a fair amount of hole carding. We never did anything that crossed the line. That was our rule. We would never do anything that could land us in jail. We never did anything that hadn't gone through the courts and been, deemed to be legal. So, we did hole card. We did some shuffle track. We did some sequence. But mostly it was card counting and hole carding. Yeah, well, LVA was. Here's a funny thing with what's going on with sports betting and all. Today, the opening of the new Circa casinos, sports books downtown, which is Derek Stevens stuff. So there's a new independent line coming out through what's called Circa Sports, and they opened in the Golden Gate. And there were some big names there. There's a guy named Bill Krakenberger. He goes by the name Crackman, pretty well known these days. There's another guy named Spanky, who's really known well in the field of sports bettors. All these guys are, they're going up to the window and they're making $10,000 laydowns and so forth. And like almost to a man, they came up to me and said, when I started, I used to get the Las Vegas Advisor so I could read about where the values were, where the coupons were. These were what we call scuffling. These were the scuffling days, and they all had to start somewhere. Yeah. And that's how they built their bankrolls. So the LVA has been a real strong thing, and it's been cool because it's translated and it's gone over boundaries. That the really top level guys read it, and the mom and pops from Iowa and Nebraska read it to find out where the good prime rib is, that sort of thing. And it's fun to do because I go get to eat the good prime rib and stuff like that. As soon as I moved from playing to publishing, I never looked back, and I never cared. I never looked back. I never missed it because I was doing better for what mattered to me. And it's funny because I don't buy things. It's like I walk around with shoes with holes in them and things. I just don't. There's something in his book that really resonated with me. He's like, I don't buy things, and I mean, it's the same thing. We all have our different reasons why we do things. But for me, it's being able to build capital to do more things. The things I buy are things like buildings and things like that, So that's what excites me now. I got to say that as we acquire more books like Wong, and I think your book is going to be very, very strong. We're going to talk about it and why I think this is a book that's going to be a game changer. But as these new books come to me and they ask me to publish them as opposed to going to New York or something like that, there's a lot of satisfaction in that. There really is. I'm excited because I was excited when I read it. And the reason I was excited when I read it was because it's kind of a new paradigm for how to play. When I came up, we played a much different way in that we were not as aggressive. We laid a lot more cover. We were more worried about being thrown out. And the reason for that was there weren't as many places to play. There just weren't. It was Las Vegas, so it was all of Nevada. And that's what we would do. We'd travel Nevada, and then we'd go across the country to Atlantic City. And on rare occasions, we might go, we never went to Canada. Other people did, but we might go to the islands. But mostly it was Nevada and Atlantic City were the only games in town. By town, I mean the United States. Now, obviously, it's a lot different. I looked at the things these guys did. I looked at the statistics. Joe showed me a bunch of things that got me all excited. I kept telling Colin, go get Joe's, ask Joe if we can use his charts, man. Let's use his charts. Because this is just really graphic information and graphic evidence of how this can still be done. And it is a new way of playing. Tommy Hyland played around during my time. Did Tommy speak to this group? Did he come in this time? Okay, Tommy didn't come in this time. But Tommy's a very famous guy, and Tommy was kind of almost a bridge to this new way. Tommy was always more aggressive than the rest of us were. We were all laying, I look back on it, we were laying too much cover. And I look at this now and go, this is better advice than I had when I was learning. And so I'm excited to publish what I consider to be a better way. The surprising part for me was how hard you guys actually went at it. Like of your own volition with all your checkouts and everything else. Because up till now, the only ones that really seemed to work that way were the MIT guys and maybe the Greeks. They were very, very staunch about that. When I played, we didn't have that kind of, rigor. but we watched each other like crazy, and we were all over one another, and that's the way, that's the way we operate, is like, okay, I just watched you play, I didn't like this, I didn't like that. But the way you guys were so regimented in that was cool to me. I mean, I was like, you know what, that's really the way it ought to be. And you can't just take it for granted. You got to go through this kind of stuff. And it's a hard thing to do, but that was one thing, yeah. I was surprised at the rigor that you guys, implemented there. The rest of it, no, because it was like, well, it would be what I expected. You went in, you got thrown out a lot, you didn't care. And it's like, okay, if that's the way you're going to play it, then that's the way that it should be played. And I thought it made a lot of sense. Well, it didn't surprise me when I looked at, again, going back to rigor, how well that you made sure these guys were trained. And so, we got one really cool depiction in the thing about what happens to different players. We had 5 different pros, and what happens, they all charted. That is the other thing. Yeah. You guys charted your play like crazy. Like, I always charted my final results, but the stuff that you guys have, because it's easier these days with apps and computers and the way everything's all hooked up, and you can keep these records. It was more difficult for us. We had to write them down and then go put them into a spreadsheet, that kind of thing. But if you're that well trained, in the long run, you're going to win money if you're playing a winning game. But it's really cool what happens, not cool, but it's interesting to see what happens after 500 hours, after 100 hours, everybody's all over the layout. All right, so here's your winning Mendoza right here, and you got a couple guys way above what they're supposed to be. This is just bell curve stuff, right? This is just, normal probability. And you got, 2 or 3 other guys below it, and they're all zigzagging all over the place. But after 500 hours, they're starting to come together, and after 1,000 hours, they're all like this. To me, that's the most valuable chart that you could ever see, because it explains a lot of things. It explains what's supposed to happen if you're good, and explains why something did happen if you're bad. And even if you are good and it happened really good for you, and not if you're bad, if you got a bad result, that it's not necessary that you're wrong, and you've got to take that into consideration. Maybe I'm playing wrong, I'm not good, but you also have to take into consideration this is a normal fluctuation and this can happen. So that's why that chart is so important. It tells you those 2 important things. It explains it away. Train and be ready. I mean, that's the main thing. That's why I really like this book, because this book is not a how-to book. This book is a manual about what it takes to win. And part of what it takes to win is training and being good, but you guys do it a different way now. You guys do it online. We had to read books. We had to read a lot of books and whatever newsletters of the day and do our own networking and kind of learn on our own. We weren't able to access the information that you are able to on Colin's website and in other places. Where I really learned was Houston's $1 Million Blackjack, which is a really good training manual. We've done some like that. The Blackjack Blueprint is one that really does train you. Knockout Blackjack, which I would still put up as a count as good as any to do along with the high-low. That's a training manual. But this is not a training manual. This is a conceptual book. This is a concept book. This is a book that tells you, here's the mindset you need. This is what you have to do. You have to essentially, as I say, worship at the altar of expected value. This is an EV guy. I mean, I was an EV guy all my life. Everything I did was about EV, everything. And I'm not talking about just playing blackjack. Everything I did, every life's decision, every day I made decisions based on EV. So it was very cool for me to read somebody who was even more into it than me. I'm like, really? But I mean, that's what this book is. And it's a fast read and it'll get you excited. And that's what I like about it. But you still have to train.
Yes.
You have to go to the website, whether you take a boot camp or not. You have to go and you have to follow these training videos, and you have to practice and train and be good and be prepared. You have to have the skills. The other thing is you can't play over your bankroll.
Yep.
I mean, everybody wants to be a star right off the bat, and you just can't do that. You just can't, because no matter how good you are, for every story of a guy who took it from 0 to 60, meaning whatever he made, $1 million or whatever, there's probably 15 or 20 that half of them who could have done it and didn't, because fluctuations got them. They were overbetting their bankroll. The casinos sort of don't understand what we're doing sometimes, and they think that it's cheating, and they think what we're doing is cheating, and it's not, as you know. It's not cheating. We're outthinking them. We're playing their game better than they are, and you have to be very aware and cognizant that this is something that's hard for them to swallow. And if they get on to what you're doing, you have to not put it in their face, you know? And you've got to not give them any reason to think you're doing something that you oughtn't, or that if they think you might be, to pull the trigger on you before they're sure, you know? And you just have to be when I talked about being high profile and playing the tournaments, I was very aware of the other competitors who were not professional level players. I would never berate them. I would never laugh at them. I would never gloat. In fact, it would be the opposite. And I famously, in my mind, got called out by, if you've heard of John Ascuaga's Nugget, well, John up in Reno, John Jr., who took over for his father, called me one day and said, you know, I can't have you playing anymore. You know, I kind of know about you. I have for a while, and enough's enough. And I said, you know, your customers like me. And he goes, they love you. You know, that's what he said. He goes, they love you. He goes, and I want to thank you for that. He goes, you were such a gentleman. You were always so good. You made it fun for everybody. And I said, so why are you kicking me out, man? And he's like, you know, he says, I really do want to tell you that. And I mean, it was a good lesson learned. And I would say that no matter what you do,